Speaker Scott Thomas, who is the subject of a book that is available. He has books with him of his life and his experiences and what has happened to him. I think of the story that the preacher was preaching away very, very vehemently, and he asked the question, how many people want to go to heaven? And nobody raised their hand. And he couldn't figure that out until he said, afterwards he asked people, he said, why didn't you say you wanted to go to heaven? They said, we all thought you meant right now. Scott Thomas has had that experience of right now many, many times. It is up to you now to listen diligently to hear what has happened, what he can tell from personal experience, what he will lead you through tonight, if you wish, in a workshop. But Scott Thomas, we're pleased to have him with us to relate his experiences personally. Welcome, welcome Scott here this afternoon.
I'm on.
Let's see if we can hear you.
Yeah, you should be able to hear me.
Okay.
I can hear me. Yeah, I had someone come up to me who, I spoke here in October at the monthly meeting, and someone who read my book in between times came up to me and said, I really like your book because it's got rather a humorous approach to things. Slightly irreverent is a word they use. And I think God had that in mind when I was born, really, because you'll notice my name is Scott. I was named after Scott Carpenter and Alan Shepard, the two Gemini pilots. My dad knew them, and he knew all the rest of the Gemini pilots too, and he liked those two guys the best, and so he named me after them. But not only that, those of you Trekkies out there will chuckle when you hear my brother, who's 3 years older than me, and I was born in 62. My brother's name is Kirk. So I would have to think that God had something comical in mind for my life. So pretty much everything tends to be a little on the irreverent side. To see me in a suit like this is kind of unusual. I don't dress up like this that often. But I will have to say that the book about me is available. I've got a few copies of it left still of the first printing. I'll be printing another batch sometime later. It's called Adventures in Heaven. It's partially fictionalized. It's not 100% as happened, but most of the fictionalization was to protect my family members from the public eye. And mainly it was to protect my father, who just passed away about a month ago. My dad, I'm pretty much free to talk about now, was Paul Thomas, which is kind of funny. When he started introduced me as Paul there briefly, I was like, okay, that's my dad's name. My dad is an internationally well-known photographer who dropped out of the limelight in the early 70s because of mafia threats, actually, to his life, which I was under as well. I've been under a death threat since I was about 2, so from them, and I don't really care anymore. But my dad, some of the pictures you guys have probably seen are like, he did the National Geographic article on Namu the killer whale, and so everything in that magazine that's ever been published since then of that era was taken by my dad, of the above ground shots. About 90% of them that you see in books and things nowadays were from my dad. And then he did the first article in Life magazine on DMSO back in the mid-60s. He went to the laboratory and spent 3 days there and learned all about it. But his most famous photograph of all was that of Bobby Kennedy, which was on the front cover of Time magazine the week he was assassinated. I think just about everybody in this room has seen that picture. It's one of the most famous ones around. And that was one that my dad took. And when I went through his house digging up articles, I was amazed when I went through his portfolio and his clippings. He had clippings from every magazine in the world with his name on them. So he had, of the major news magazines. So he was in everything for a period of time in the 60s and the early 70s. And so that's part of why we fictionalized the book. And then also, in the meantime, I also went through a divorce, and my ex-wife was absolutely paranoid of having anything about her out in public. And which wasn't really that important anyway. She wasn't didn't have any notoriety, but my divorce finally was finalized same time my dad died, so everything happened to me last month. It all got over with, and so my life has really changed a lot in the last year as things have taken off for me. What happened, though, 8 years ago was what you're here to hear about, which was when I was in a church service singing songs, and the song leader was up there. He says, just close your eyes and put yourself in front of the throne of God. All of a sudden, I was in front of the throne of God. It was there. I thought it was a picture. It was just, that it didn't move, that it was static. But at the same time, like when I look at that light over there shining at me, it doesn't really move. It just sits there a little bit. There's a little bit of a buzz to it from the 60 hertz, but it's pretty much static. But in the image I saw, it was about that bright, but you could see streams of light coming out from it in waves, which you can't see out of that. And that was really fascinating to me, and it should have caught my attention to make me realize it was three-dimensional. I've done theater technical directing for 17 years, and done lighting was my specialty, and so I worked with everything from little specialty lights all the way up to the huge stage lights that would fry an egg when you get up on stage. And so I should have noticed that this light was not a normal light, but I just thought, oh, it was a non-moving picture. Well, then it happened again in another instance, and I don't remember some of these early instances because it's like, do you remember what you had for breakfast 8 or 10 years ago? I mean, I don't. And so, some of my memories have faded on some of these things. But what happened was I was in a group at the time of people who were seeking to have prophetic things happening in our lives. It was just a group of us guys that got together, and we had a lot of fun as we got together and shared what was told to us by the Spirit during the week. We'd share what was happening, and it really encouraged us as we found that one person after another was led to read the exact same verses in the Bible that week, or something like that. And we all started seeking spiritual experiences of greater and greater depth, and this is what happened to me and a couple other guys. We all got just into visions really quickly as things started unfolding. Some of my early visions were just out in the green grass. I ended up going out to this great big grassy field, and the hills were just rolling green, and off in the distance there was a line of trees, and so I walked down to the line of trees, and there's a river in the middle of it, and got to play in the water. And so I started and just walked around. I mean, it was one of the things I learned was it wasn't a static picture, that I could start going further with it and actually turn my head and look. I could feel the wind blowing against me. It's not just visual that you get when you go to heaven. You could have any of the 5 senses in any combination, too. It depends on how sensitive you are. Personally, I believe that your spirit is in heaven at all times, and that you're just opening your eyes or a window in your mind to see what your other eyes are seeing. I've found recently that some people have what they call an oversoul. That's what I believe that is to me, but I only learned that about a week ago. I believe it's the spirit of who I am is there, and this is just a tent, a shell, something I live in while I'm down here, and this is where my soul is. But I'm learning a lot while I'm here. But what we're trying to do is tap into being able to open your mind so that you can see where your spirit is and see what it sees and do what it does. And so it's an out-of-body experience, but it doesn't have some of the same characteristics I've read of from other OBE people. For me, going there is instantaneous. I don't have any tunnel of light type experience. I just go there. I'm just suddenly there. It's like being transported. That made me chuckle too. Scotty, beam me up. Incredible. But anyway, that's the way it is. I just suddenly I'm right there, and I can walk around. Some of these early visions, I started playing in the water. I didn't do anything really serious. I didn't see a soul. Just rolling green hills as far as the eye can see, and mountains off in the distance, and this river. And I went down the river and played in the water, and it was really quite an experience. And I could swim underwater for as long as I wanted to and not drown. There's fish in the river, and I got to swim around with them, and the rocks were beautiful. And then I found there was a waterfall because I fell off of it. No fear in heaven. I mean, it's great. And Then I started meeting people up there. The most interesting one was meeting a guy who was also in our group, he was in a college classroom at the time, taking a course in repairing small office equipment. And so he was just sitting in there in a lecture, and all of a sudden he was taken to heaven without a choice. And I was taken to heaven without choice at the same time too. I was just snatched and pulled up there and put there. And I saw him down by the river, and we started playing and roughhousing and all this stuff. And then I went swimming way down the river and fell off the waterfall again and flew back in the air, because you can do anything you want to. If you just think it, it happens. So I flew, and I flew back and landed in the water next to him. And this went on for about an hour. And when I got done with it, I was sitting next to the phone wondering what was going to happen next, because I came back to my body. I was aware of being in the room in my office at home, because I had a home office at the time. And so I was aware of being there, but not too much so. It was the reality of heaven is so much more real than here that it's easy to get lost over there and not want to come back here. But what happened was, when I came back, I was sitting there at the phone, and I was wondering what would happen, and just right then it rang. And this friend of mine that I'm still in good touch with, Phil, is on the other end. He says, "Scott, I've had this incredibly strong burden to pray for you and Al over the last hour. What's happening? Is something wrong?" And I said, "Phil, you are not going to believe what just happened to me." And I told him what happened. And I didn't call my friend Al at the time. I just kept on waiting. Phil and I talked for a little while, and he was just totally blown away by this whole thing. He thought, well, I wonder if this is real. Well, let's wait and find out what Al says. So anyway, Al called me about 2 hours later, and he said, "What were you doing about 3 hours ago?" or whatever it was. And I said, "I was sitting in my office, but then I was taken up into heaven while I was in the office." And as we started dropping little hints to each other, we suddenly realized we had both been there. We had both seen each other, because we could identify what the other person was wearing. We could see, I talked about the order of events that happened, and they were exactly as he remembered them. And likewise, we kept dropping little tiny pieces of the story. We didn't let, neither one of us didn't just lay out the whole story to each other. We were kind of like fishing each other and fishing to find out if it was real, because we didn't know if it was. And sure enough, it was. We had several other experiences where we traveled throughout the heavenly regions together after that. I later learned fairly quickly that when you see somebody in heaven, you go talk to them, because they're there for a reason. Doesn't matter what that reason is, you're training or just to simply get used to seeing people. So I went and I saw Jesus there for the first time, one time, and I fell at his feet, and because I knew it was him, and he took me outside. This was during a church service, by the way, during a song that we sing, and at this particular church, they always sang every song the same way. You did twice through the song, because it was one of these chorus type songs you can sing over and over again. They do, I think, 2 or 3 times through it, and that was the end. Well, the vision started at the beginning, but I spent a 20-minute conversation with Jesus out on the grass outside the New Jerusalem. At least 20 minutes. We talked about all kinds of stuff. It was really neat. He explained to me about my childhood and about how I'd grown up without a father around, because when I was 3, my mom and dad divorced. And so I didn't have a father growing up. And anyway, he explained what that impact had made on my relationship with my Heavenly Father. I couldn't relate to him because I didn't have a father I could relate to. I only had a mother. And so it made it very difficult for me to relate to him. I was in dire fear of the Father. And he went through all this detail, and it took a long time to explain. It was at least 20 minutes. During the time, I felt this incredible rushing sensation, which is really weird. And when I came back from this vision after he explained all this stuff, only maybe 1 minute had passed on earth. They were only in the second time through the chorus in this song. I mean, it was incredible. It was what I'd call a time warp. It is so bizarre, because it was like 20 minutes past there while in 1 minute past here. And so I I had a few things told to me in that vision of when Jesus talked to me that would come to pass, and they did, about right on Rosh Hashanah of that year, which was in September. That's when it all really began, and that's when he told me he wanted me to start coming up to heaven a lot. And that was right near my 30th birthday. And so, because my birthday is in the middle of October, and Rosh Hashanah was near the end of September at that time. And so over about a 4-week period, I had my 30th birthday, and Rosh Hashanah happened, and then there was this man that he told me he was going to have me go meet came into my life. And this man is a pastor of a church in Seattle, or in Renton actually. He's been pastoring the same church for 50 years now, which is a record for Washington State. No pastor has ever done that before. And this guy, his whole focus of his church is sonship, learning how to be a son to your Heavenly Father, which was just what I needed to hear. And so I spent 3 months with him and learned an awful lot about what he taught, and it was wonderful. It helped me quite a bit. And then I went from there into more and more visions where they kept taking me into further and further things. The one fun vision was this time when I was talking with Jesus out on this hillside, and he says, well, he was right in the middle of talking, and all of a sudden I had this really funny feeling of being watched come over me. And so I turned and started looking, and the names started popping into my head of the people I was looking at, because that's what happens. The Spirit speaks to your mind simultaneously to verbal communication. It's all telepathy. I've learned an awful lot of telepathy up there, and that's what I usually communicate with up there, and I try it down here, and I'm semi-successful down here with it. It's kind of fun. But it's more like a toy here than it is in heaven. It's a real serious mode of communication up there, because you can speak an entire volume of a book to somebody in 2 seconds with telepathy up there. And anyhow, the names started popping into these people, and I was seeing figures, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Moses, Elijah, whoever. And they were all crowded around me, scattered around this field, and it was suddenly the verse in the Bible popped into my head that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And I'm like, oh, that's real. And then then Jesus turns to me and says, there's somebody I'd like you to meet. And he turns away, and up is walking this guy that's kind of bow-legged and short and bald head, and he had these little gold frame glasses on, kind of looked like Gandhi. And he comes up to me, and all of a sudden his name comes into my head, Paul. And I go, oh my gosh, this is the Apostle Paul. And we ended up talking for a while, and he talked to me about things I needed to take care of in my personal life that was really good for personal growth that I needed to go through at the time. And then, but the one thing that really caught me is really strange is why in the world was he wearing glasses in heaven? Doesn't make sense. So after 2 or 3 times I had met Paul, after that I talked to him and asked him finally, I got up the nerve and I said, why are you wearing glasses in heaven? And he says, oh, well, these are just flat lenses. I mean, they're flat. They don't distort the image. But what they are is to remind me of the struggles I went through in the flesh when I was on earth. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. And since that time, I've met other people who've also met Paul in heaven without having heard my testimony about what I saw. And they've also met him in glasses, too. Now, not everybody has, but many have. In these little wireframe glasses. He looks like Gandhi. It's really a kick to see him. And he has this really loud voice, piercing. And he's a really neat guy. And Jesus, a lot of people ask me what he looks like, so I thought I'd share that with you. There's one person I met here on earth who looks vaguely familiar, vaguely similar to him, and that was, of all people, Barry Maguire. I met Barry Maguire a few years back, and he looks so much like Jesus, it's shocking to me, except his skin is too light. But he's darkened Barry Maguire's skin, make him about 30 years younger than the way he looks today. Barry Maguire is the famous singer from the 60s. He sang Green Green, and he sang a couple other famous songs from the hippie era. And he still goes around and does concerts, but there's usually little tiny crowds that show up for him. He's mostly in the Christian circles now performing in churches. But back then he was really one of the hippie singers that was quite famous on the radio. I still hear his songs now and then on the radio. I go, oh, it's Barry again. And but his hair is multicolored is the best way to describe it. Many people have seen Jesus, and many people have different images of what his hair was. But since I had 17 years in theater, and my dad was a photographer, trained me in images and photography and observing individual detail, I figured out real quick, his hair is the kind of color that changes with the light. So it depends on whether the light's shining from the front, from the top, from the side, from the back. His hair will change colors. So will most of yours as well. I mean, I look at some of you, especially the people right over and through here, and a lot of you have, let's see, two people back there have a brown hair, but they have a halo effect over them that's almost golden. It's a golden red. And so, I mean, their hair changes color just as well as the rest of yours would if we had lighting changes around you. So does Jesus' hair. It changes like that. And so that's why you end up with different hair colors from certain people. Some people say he's got dark hair. Some people medium dark. Some people light. I mean, it depends on the lighting. He stands about the same height I do, maybe an inch taller or shorter. I can't really tell. I haven't really gone up and tried to figure that out exactly. And he's not what you'd call the really physically attractive type person. He's just a normal, average, everyday looking guy. What's really kind of fun is his mom, Mary. I've met her many times, and she's a sweetheart. She looks exactly like him, just shorter and feminine and longer hair. It's really, really sweet to see her. She doesn't look anything like the Mary pictures that you see in the paintings, and Jesus doesn't look like any of the Jesus paintings I've ever seen either. But what happens is, well, let's see, trying to kind of see where I should go next with this. I've met many different people up there, and even large group gatherings. We had one time where I went up there and spent an entire 24-hour period in heaven where I went through different kinds of a worship service type situation where everybody was singing led by Spirit within them, and everybody was singing the same words and different harmonies and whatever, all at the same time. It was just absolutely heavenly. I've never been anything like it here on earth before. However, I've heard of that happening back in the 40s up in Canada. I had an old guy that I met one time who told me about that, where it really did happen here on earth, and they called it the heavenly choir, where everybody was singing like that, and they could hear the angels accompanying them, and that's what we could hear up there too. And heaven went through, when I was there for 24 hours, it went through periods of, it was kind of like a rolling thing. Everybody just knew what to do next. The Spirit was so strong there. Everybody just knew. Everything was perfectly synchronized and harmonized. And there was quiet periods where everybody just meditated. There was times when people just stood around little groups and talked. There was times when everybody came together and sang. This is just what happens in a throne room, because there's a huge, heaven is huge. This is just the area that's right in there. There would be times where there's private sessions with the Father. People go up and talk to him. There was, in front of the throne, the first time I went in there, it was really spectacular, where I came I followed the river up, and the doors opened in front of me and blinded me. I could not see anything from the light coming in. So I walked forward a few feet and stopped, because I sensed that, like the stage ends right here, the river flows out underneath the door the same way in heaven, and so if you stepped another step further, you're going to be in the drink. So I stopped and let my eyes get used to it, and I see these 24 chairs, people getting up and scooting back to kind of make way to see the throne, and there was these 4 enormous things that stood about as tall as the ceiling is, and they were the weirdest looking creatures I'd ever seen in my life, and it all parted, and the voice boomed out from the throne, "Welcome, Melchizedek," which I was like, I'm not Melchizedek. I don't know. And what happened was, I discovered later that I'd been given that training into the Melchizedek priesthood. I know there's many people who go around saying they're in that priesthood, but as I've studied in the Bible, there's very specific things and earmarks you find in a Melchizedek priest. There's many, many messengers and many, many priestly orders. It's just that people seem to latch on the Melchizedek one out because it's popular. It's a popular one in the Mormon Church and in the Bible. It's mentioned, and so people have picked up on that and decided that's a priestly order they want to be in. I've been shown there isn't that many Melchizedek priests. They're the ones who are, it's the priesthood of revealers. They need to be able to go to heaven and tell you what it looks like, bring you back, take you there with them, whatever. That's what I'll do tonight in my workshop. Anybody who wants to go, we can try it. I'm not guaranteeing you will go, but you can try. We did one here back in October, and there was, 15 people, and a lot of people had interesting experiences in that. Some people saw a lot, and other people saw very little. It varies with the person and where they are in their spiritual walk at the time and what's going on with them. But what happened then was the Father, going back to this one where I first came into the throne room, there was these 24 chairs, and they're the 24 elders, and these great big 4 things back right in front of the throne were these, the 4 of them each look different, and they have weird-looking features to them. Some of them are feathered, some of them aren't. One of them has an eagle's head, and so on. And I was puzzling over what these things are, because the Bible calls them, I think, seraphim or something like that, or the 4 living creatures in another place. And I was wondering why they were there and why they're so close to the throne. And it was spoken to me by the Spirit that they represent the animal kingdom, and they are close in with God because they do what He says, and they don't have all the doubts and the strange things going on inside them like we do. And so they're right there close. They're closer to the throne than we are in representatives. And the one thing a lot of people ask is, okay, in the Bible it says no man can see God and live. And yet I can see Him. I've walked up to His throne. I've stood within 5 feet of Him. I've given Him a hug before. I've laid my head in His lap at times when I've been distraught. He looks like an old man to me. But about a month ago, or maybe it was 2 months ago now, it's been a while, but I was puzzling about this more and more as to why I see Him as an old man, and yet other people I know have seen Him in other forms. And there's some people out there who are really offended by hearing God being spoken of as a male deity rather than female or something else. And so I went up in front of Him and I asked Him about that. And instead of answering the question, He changed from being this old man sitting on the throne to this beautiful, gorgeous young woman sitting there staring at me. And I'm like, wow. And then changed from that image, the image changed to an older, very respectable type looking lady, the kind that I would anytime go to for advice or help, whatever, that was just the kind of woman that was just, not matronly, I would call it, but more like just the kind that was just very, very respectable. I don't know how else to describe it. And very beautiful too, yet looking like she was in her 60s or 70s. And then the image again shifted to a young man, which naturally I didn't really get all that thrilled about. And what God showed me was that I'm seeing what I need to see, which is an old father figure. That every one of us needs to see Him the way, and I refer to Him as a him just because it's easy in this language. I don't want to call Him an it, because that's the only neutral personal pronoun we have in this language that could be used, and I don't like it. I'd rather use him or her if I'm going to use anything. But I speak of Him as a him because that's what I need to see. I need to see a male figure. I need to see someone strong in front of me, out leading me in the direction of where I need to go in my life, because I have more feminine energy than masculine energy in me, and so I need the balance of more masculine energy, and I need to seek that and get that from God, and that's why I'm being shown that image. So it doesn't bother me if any one of you saw anything you could imagine that was the Creator. That wouldn't bother me, because I know that He is what He has to be when He has to be it, because He's living. He's not just a static, dead thing. And we all know that. I mean, there's no way this place could have just happened. It was created. He's my Creator, and I love Him for that. And so if there's any of you here who don't believe in a Creator, you're looking at somebody who's going to look you in the eye and say, I'm sorry, but I've met Him face to face. I've met His Son who came and lived on this earth and walked among us. I know Him. These are not just, this isn't just pie in the sky faith. This is real to me, because it's more real than this place is. This is so dark and full of shadows and dead. I mean, in heaven you cut a board and there's no sawdust. You go out in the grass, and that was one of the first things that happened to me when I went there. Is I went out in the grassy field, and I had been doing lawn mowing for work when I was in high school, and so I was really into grass. So as soon as I got out there in that grassy field, first thing I did is I was down there on my face, not worshiping God. I was looking at the grass. I was parting it so I could see the bottom. I was looking for the dead grass at the bottom, because when you get out into any one of these lawns around here, you part the grass that, looks, even if it's a nice looking green lawn, you still part the grass and it's dead and brown underneath because of all the dead ones that have laid down underneath it. There wasn't any in heaven, not a scrap. It was just bare earth with a perfect little kind of cup at the bottom that was like I can't think of the word for it, but it's almost like paper. And then out of it came these perfectly formed blades of grass that only grew that high too. Every one of them was the same. It was like astroturf, but it was soft as silk. It was just beautiful. And then there's other areas in heaven I've been to with tall grass that grows up like you have when it goes to seed around here. But heaven to me is a really beautiful place like that, because you can explore all over there, and you don't just have to stay in one place. I've been given the authority to go into the throne room, to go in front of the Father and to talk with him and to carry messages. And I go and I carry messages between planets too, because I've been to many other planets. I don't just stay here. I go to different ones on the outsides of the veil. There's a dark veil out there that separates the dark side from the light. Out beyond that veil, which is beyond our galaxies that we've reached with the vision of with our telescopes, there's a veil there. And it says in the Bible that at some point that veil will be stripped away and all eyes will see him when he comes. You remember in Revelation it talks about that, if you read that, or in Matthew, it talks about how every eye will see him coming. And that's why, is because that veil will be stripped away. Beyond that veil lies light. It's all light out there. And so the planets don't have night and day like we have here. And this is a good group to share one opinion I have on it. A lot of people wonder, well, why are the ETs so prevalent around here? My opinion of that is this is the only planet in the universe that's got both light and dark people coexisting and cohabitating. And there's also the wide variety of looks of people. I mean, you look at this room and there's an extremely wide. We have dark skin, we have middle of the road skin, we have really light skin, we have dark hair, we have middle of the, we have brown hair, we have red hair, we have gray, we have white, we have all this variety here. Just in this room alone there's an incredible amount of variety. They don't have that out there in these other places. Every place I've been, it's uniform. There's not the variety of the people, there's not the variety of what's on the inside of them either, as far as the way their heart attitude is. And so they're fascinated by this place. They want to find out what makes us tick, and so that's why they hang out. Anyway, in the workshop I'll describe a whole lot more of my visions, and to whatever degree people want to hear. And we'll do 1 or 2 or 3 sessions of going to heaven. I don't like to do one huge long one because it's a little too much for people to absorb at once. It's better to do a 15 or 20 minute session and then get out of it and talk about what we saw and see what people were experiencing, and then go back into it again and do it again. And so we've got 3 hours tonight, so we'll have a lot of time to do that. But in between times I'll tell you more stories about where I've been and what I've seen. The book has an awful lot in it, and I'm doing another book now I was shown that will fill in all the gaps of what we cut out of this one. Mike Mason wrote this book about me, and he's a best-selling author, mostly known among Christian circles for his books on marriage. He was featured on Focus on the Family and other Christian shows with his books. And none of his publishers would carry our books, so we had to self-publish it. And it was too new age for them, for the Christian publishers like Multnomah and other ones that he's used before. But we cut an awful lot of material out that I'm finding is extremely vital, that I want to get out in a book. And about a week ago, God just showed me an entire book, front to back, and I need to sit down and write it. And I got the preface done just before I flew down here, and I'm going to work on the rest of it, so I should have it out in the next 6 months or less, I'll hopefully have another one out. And this one I'll have to reprint. I've only got 7 copies left of this book right now, this first one about me. So those of you who are just dying to get it, you're going to have to make a mad scramble back there and get it, because they'll be gone, I'm sure, this time around, but we'll reprint soon. I've given you a little bit of a thumbnail sketch over it, and I know from speaking here in October that I got peppered with questions after. So I'm cutting off a little early to let you guys get up and start asking questions for the next 20 minutes or so, because we ran out of time on questions when I was here. And I did an almost 2-hour presentation here in October, and that still wasn't enough time. Look, there's somebody heading there now. Go ahead. The switch is off on the top of that mic, I bet, because I turned it off earlier when it was up here. There you go. I heard it.
No, I don't think so. Is it on?
Yeah.
Try it now? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm interested in any comment you might have about the so-called Course in Miracles that is purported to be from Jesus. Are you familiar with that body of literature, Course in
I
Miracles?
have never read it, but I'm familiar with it vaguely, because years ago, before I had all these visions, I went through an intensive study in apologetics, biblical apologetics, for about 5 or 6 years. In fact, I was scheduled to meet with Walter Martin, and he died 3 days before I was supposed to meet with him, and I ended up meeting with Craig Hawkins instead for 3 days. And so I really got into it deep. I, at that time, wasn't that thrilled about it, and I've never been led to go back and read it at this point, although my mind has a much different frame of reference now than it did back then.
Would you be willing to ask Jesus about this the next time if it's a valid material?
There's always good in everything. So I'll tell you that much.
I'm aware of that. There's
so,
good in things that are way off base, too. There's a lot of whatever truth in that. But I'm interested in if the assertions that are made about this being corrections of some aspects of what Jesus told his disciples, but knowledge crumbles on the hard rock of time, and some things were distorted. They were working at their level, and he was speaking at his, that sort of idea.
I actually very much agree with that concept, because I've had my eyes quite soundly ripped open in a number of areas, because there's a few theological issues that I had that I took up with God on a number of occasions and argued with him about them. And he had to clarify a lot of stuff. And personally, one of the things that they told me early on was, all that is in the Bible is true, but not all truth is in the Bible. And then as I studied theology in much more depth, I found that there's an extremely wide variety of interpretations of Scripture, and there's over 23,000 manuscripts of the Bible dating from within 100 years of Jesus walking on the earth. And as a result, even the Scriptures that we have too much, they've changed them. Like take the New International Version, which is one of the most popular Bibles there is nowadays. Take today's edition that you can buy in the store, go back 10 years and go verse by verse through the sucker, and you will find changes all over the place, because it's a committee voted on Bible. Right. It changes. Yeah. And I don't use the NIV because of that. I call it the New Watered Down Version, because it really is watered down in spots.
One other quick question. I noticed you talk about going up to heaven, et cetera, et cetera. Can you say more about that? I mean, a lot of people think of it as another dimension, or not, and up being an old concept. Is it like, for you, it's really up there somewhere?
I use the term up as an old concept because everybody will recognize what I'm talking about. It's within you.
Okay.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, Bill.
Since you were up in heaven, you got to talk to a lot of different people, and I was wondering if you got to learn a little bit about these last days that we're living in. Like, are we at a time where Jesus is coming back soon? And maybe you could expound a little bit on how the end times are going to kind of play themselves out as you see it.
There's a lengthy story in the back of the book about the harvesting angels, and I was shown the 4 harvesting angels that were sent out to walk upon the earth and to mark the hearts of the people who were really in tune with God, and so that people like me, when they see the mark, can then work with those people more in depth and bring them further along much more quickly. And so that's what I do. The whole end times thing, I actually have to say I agree lock, stock, and barrel with the one statement that Walter Martin made years and years ago, probably 30 years ago. He said that he's what's called a pan-tribulationist. Whatever way it pans out, that's what happens. And that's the way I feel. I don't want to stick my neck out on a lot of stuff because I really don't actually have much opinion on it. I don't care.
Okay, I have a question. I just wanted to get more clarity on the physical description of Jesus and also Mary Magdalene, if you talked to her.
I haven't seen Mary Magdalene in probably 6 or 7 years, and so I don't remember what she looked like. I really can't tell you too well. The image coming back to my mind right now is that of, just an average woman, but pretty, but an average woman. And most interesting thing is of Mary, the mother of Jesus. When I asked her one time about what she thought of all the people worshiping her, she's going, "Come on," she's more down to earth. She's like, I'm a human too. I don't need to be worshipped. So I think that many people, once they get up there, they realize that it's all an even playing field in heaven. There isn't one person above another. I'm not superior to anybody else. I'm even with the doorman. It's just that each one is given a different job to do, and they all work in harmony as the Spirit leads us when we work up there.
I have another really quick question. I've been recently reading the Pistis Sophia in Fragments of a Faith Forgotten and the Books of the Savior. And a lot of that is actually Jesus talking to his disciples after he came back and was resurrected and speaking the mysteries about the Pistis Sophia to his disciples, including Mary Magdalene. Did he ever have any conversations regarding the theme and the myth of the Pistis Sophia?
I don't even know that work. I've never studied that, so I don't even know what that's about. But there was more that Jesus taught in his lifetime than could be written down in dozens and dozens and dozens of books. So I don't know what else to say.
Show you later.
Are you familiar with Glenda Green?
No.
Her book, her
I've-
painting?
One of the things that I've done is I purposely have isolated myself from others who've had heavenly visions, with the exception of Dr. Richard Eby, who lives in Southern California. He's the only one I've communicated with who's ever and read the books of their visions of heaven. His is the only one I've ever read. I've kept myself out of the rest of them in order to keep what I see pure, so that I know that I'm not just repeating yet the next guy's thing. I want what I'm bringing to you people to be from me, that I feel comes from God, so it's not just something else. So no, I'm not familiar with that book.
Okay, well, she claimed that he came to, and she painted a picture of him, and during this painting, I think it was 3 or 4 months long, she has taped and written a book of discussions that she had with him. So I was just curious if you had been exposed to that or what your thoughts were on that. But if you haven't, okay, my next question was on reincarnation. What is the scoop on that from your point of view?
Now that's a real interesting one, because that's a new area of training I've been going into. I absolutely was not a believer in reincarnation for all the way through the apologetical training I went through in theology and so on. I was taught the defense of the scriptures about that issue in great depth, and then my eyes they've been slowly teaching me otherwise in heaven over the last year, especially the last 3 months, where I was taught in depth from the scriptures. They went through and taught me what the scriptures really had to say about it. There actually is as much to support in the Bible that's in support of reincarnation as there is against it. In fact, there are very many of the verses, when it was explained to me by the Spirit, showed me that it was very easily rectified when you studied it from an apologetical point of view. So they did teach me that, and now I am of that point of view, that reincarnation is something that happens. It's made me feel a whole lot more comfortable with this life that I'm living, because I had no idea how I could learn in all the different areas that I've worked in over this this short period of time. There's many people I've talked to in many wide variety of fields of science and the arts and whatever, and every time they hear all the experience I've had and how quickly and how good I got at each one of them, they said, you're 80 years old or something. How could you possibly know all this stuff? And then there's different times that I felt that I was somebody else, but I haven't had any past life memories come back to me, so I don't know about that. But I am very much open to that whole concept, and that seems to be one that is in the Bible. The one that they pointed to the most when they were giving me examples in heaven was about Elijah being reincarnated in John the Baptist. That was one of the key ones they pointed to and said that's one that hasn't been deleted out of the Bible. And so that's where I am on it. I've changed.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit more your understanding of the Melchizedek priesthood?
The Melchizedek priesthood is a priesthood of revealers made up of approximately 100 priests that have served throughout time in various roles. As far as I know, there's only 9 on the planet right now, which is what I was told in heaven. And we're scattered throughout the continents, only 1 or 2 per continent. And that there's that Jesus is in that priesthood because he's also a revealer of heaven. He talked about it. You remember his talking about, what was it, the rich man and Lazarus. And there was other times he talked about it too. But it's made up of those who are revealers, specifically where we get that from is the first verse of the book of Revelation, where it talks about Jesus being the revealer. And in Hebrews it talks about Jesus being in the order of Melchizedek as a priesthood. Melchizedek himself is not Jesus. That's one thing that some people have theologically a real mix-up on, and I love watching theologians try and do flips and twists and try and jam Jesus into the image of Melchizedek, because there's no way they can fit, chronologically or otherwise. They're 2 different people. When I see them in heaven, Jesus looked like what I described to you briefly there, of an average weight guy, but he was somewhat husky build. Melchizedek, his hair is cut perfect. I mean, it's like every hair on his head is perfect, and he's got a beard that's short, trimmed kind of like mine, and he's taller than Jesus by about an inch or 2. I mean, there's so much differences between them. There's no way they're the same person. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Adequately? Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you about the Urantia book. Have you read it?
The which one?
The Urantia?
Oh, Urantia. No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, when I was 7 years old, I spent time in a cave with 450,000 years of history. And later on, about 20 years ago now, I met with people that have been in the same cave and saw the 450,000 years of history, same as I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought it was a mad dream. My parents convinced me. But do you feel there's that much history on the earth?
Time is relative. We don't know how much time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
and so that 450,000 years of history you may have felt, was it really linear or was it overlapping?
Linear.
Do you see what I mean? I mean, it could have been otherwise. It could have been overlapping. So.
No, I met a man, and he's in Colorado Springs, that was down in the Mesopotamia area, and he cut a piece of a building off under the water and brought it back, showed it to me.
Mm-hmm.
It took him days and days and days to cut a little piece off.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like metal. So there's a lot down there the government doesn't want us to know.
Yeah, but at the same time, when I was younger, my stepbrother was on the board of directors of the Bible Science Association in Seattle, and we had every major creation scientist came through and spoke there in Seattle, and my stepbrother hosted them, and I met every one of them except for Dwayne Gish. He's the only one I haven't met out of all the famous scientists, and I've heard so many scientific things that talk about the age of the planets it'd be impossible for it to be that old, that I personally believe in a young solar system in this solar system because of that. One example is the dust on the moon. If the dust on the moon was 450,000 years, it would be covering the Earth all the way from the moon. That's why that's why Neil Armstrong was so careful when they piloted the craft that they landed next to a big rock that they thought would hold up the ship, because they thought they were going to plunge through miles of dust and die.
Well, this literature is all in the Veds. You know anything about the Veds?
Mm-mm.
Okay. All right, I wanted to ask you one more question. How big is Jesus? How tall did he look to you?
About even with me, roughly. So he'd be about 5'11" to 6 foot, 6.
Really that tall? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I had jungle rot in my ears for 8 years, and I went into transcendental meditation, as I transcended, he was standing there with a hand on each side of my ears, and he was just a little bit taller than me.
Well, you know what? I don't know how tall I am in heaven.
Aren't you?
No,
you?
I don't know, because that's how tall I am here. So I'm assuming, well, if I'm 6 foot here, then I must be 6 foot there. Well, what if I'm not?
Yeah, well, I kind of wondered about that. But he had eyes that looked almost like diamonds.
Oh yeah, yeah, they're beautiful eyes.
And he just stood there, and I have talked to Jesus through Jean Peterson now, who is a great translator, and she's a friend of Glenda Green's that wrote the book. And he took me through my husband's death, Jesus and Mary both, and they're always
Beautiful.
together. Did you see Mary?
I've seen Mary, yeah, many times.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But they
She's one
both
of my
helped me
trainers.
through the funeral, and they gave my husband flowers, and they have now given me a stone for my husband's marriage into the next life now.
It's beautiful.
And,
Mary just gave me a stone a couple days ago that I have. It's a little.
did?
Well, Mary, it's a little amethyst heart with a hummingbird in the middle of it.
Mine
Beautiful.
looks almost like a little strawberry. It has little diamonds all over it.
Yeah.
And this being made now, too, here on Earth.
Cool. I should do the same.
Huh?
I should do the same. Find somebody to make the one here on Earth that mirrors what I saw. I'm glad actually that you mentioned what you mentioned, because I had one more quick story I wanted to share that happened a month ago when my dad died. He was absolutely terrified of death, and what happened was finally the last day he was alive, I went in there to his hospital room, and I took him in a vision up into heaven and let him run around for a while. He was totally thrilled with it. He'd never been there before. His mind opened up to where he could accept it, and he went. He died within 6 hours after that, because it totally put him at peace.
Well, Jesus had told me that my husband had been coming over for quite a few times.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
You want it?
In this same room 2 weeks ago, a lot of us came to listen to a gentleman named Wayne Peterson, who was talking about a subject I'm sure you've been questioned about, Maitreya, the fella in London. Your comments, please.
Okay, Lord Maitreya. I used to study that issue years ago when I was in apologetics and theology, and I worked with deprogramming and cult research and all that kind of stuff too. So I met a lot of the people that, like Ted was talking about in his speech. But I actually heard all this kind of stuff, and there was a lot of ballyhoo about, oh, Maitreya, he's going to cause problems and all this stuff. And you know what? I don't care anymore. I am so full of the love and light of God, I really don't care what he does. I know that there is somebody they claim to be over there who is the Antichrist, but to me, love transcends all and will defeat him, regardless. I don't need to hate him, I don't need to fight him, and neither does anybody else, really. We need to love him. So that's about all a comment I'd have to say on Maitreya. So.
Okay.
Any other questions? Did you think of another one? Okay. So, oh, there goes somebody running over there real fast.
Yeah, sweetheart.
About two.
I just say the same thing when people talk about Timothy McVeigh and Hitler. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, so. Well, anyhow, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate, and I love hearing stories that other people have of going to heaven too, because every one of you has been there most likely at some time in your life most likely as a child, and you were told that it was an imaginary place. So let your mind go back there, and you can go back anytime you want.
No, there is something I'd like to mention too. When Jesus talked to me about Judas, he says he's been my friend for life and still is, so quit talking about what he did to me. He says love is love.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And he says you just don't give up on a friend no matter what they do.
That's right.
And I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, I'm being taught that going through a divorce.
And he says, quit bowing down. He says, quit bowing down to me now too. And he says, start listening and listening to some of the people that are on earth here now. Don't keep going back to the old ones. There's a lot of new ones.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, he talked for me, talked almost a half hour.
Yeah. Did you have a question there? And I think that'll be it.
Oh, I just come up with one.
Okay.
What about Judas Iscariot? Have you ever seen him?
No, I never have. I've never looked for him, though. There's a lot of people in the Bible I haven't looked for that I've been asked about, so he's just one of the many. There's hundreds of people in the Bible that I haven't met. So I have a group of about a dozen trainers that I work with most closely. And those include Paul and Mary and others like that. But not Peter. Then it'd be kind of fun if I had Peter, Paul, and Mary. Oh.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think that's about it. And hopefully we'll see some of you tonight. We have a lot of really great workshops going on, so it's going to be quite a choice for many of us. I have to be in mine, though.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Scott.